listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And today's episode, we've asked the question, who else is in your bedroom? Of course, we're not talking about somebody else who's physically in your bedroom, but it really is one of the questions that we have gotten from several listeners lately. And so we thought that this was a great topic to talk about and just jump into the way that sex addiction and betrayal trauma, just the practical and the reality that a lot of people experience when they're reintegrating sex.
Mm-hmm. I love this question because I like the ones where we have spoken with this person a little bit, because we can't get to every email. We do try to peek at them. And if there's some kind of resource we can suggest in the meantime, or like, hey, I think a group would be really beneficial, or there's something concerning, sometimes we catch that and we're able to respond, but we're not able to respond to every email. And this was one I was able to respond to. And so I got a little bit more background. And the woman who asked this first question, how do I stop thinking about the prostitutes my husband was with when he and I have sex? How do I get my head sorted out? She heard an episode where we were talking and I had mentioned John's past with prostitutes. And she emailed right away after that episode and was like, how are you able to talk about his past with prostitutes without it being so triggering? Because she's actually still in her marriage and they've been married a long time and they're doing really well. But she's struggling to not feel triggered and have those thoughts and images of prostitutes. And so I got to share with her a little bit, and what I told her was, always, I think we say this on every hard situation in the sex life, we say, first make sure that you've processed your betrayal trauma fully. Make sure that they are in active recovery and doing very well. Make sure that you feel emotionally and physically safe. So like, those are the things where I'm not going to tell you how to not get those thoughts, how to get those thoughts out of your head if things are still happening or there hasn't been any work done or reconciliation or forgiveness or trust. Those things have to come first. So that's always my little thing to put in there, my little plug. So they've done all that stuff. And now it's just those images that she's having trouble wrestling with. And we've talked about this on a few episodes, that wrestling, and I call it wrestling because I literally think of myself with a lasso, pulling down these thoughts. It's physically exhausting, but they get farther and fewer between the more that you just have that diligence to not run away with it. And I actually told her that I did a book study. It was by Priscilla Shirer. And I can't remember what it was called, but it was the women's companion to that Courageous movie that had the devotional. And then there was a women's companion by Priscilla Shirer. And I believe it was that resource where she had talked about having her mind being like two rooms. And I could be totally butchering this. How I applied whatever I read way back then, 15 years ago, was there was two rooms in my head, and one had all of the frustrations and negative things and things that are unhelpful thoughts. We'll label them unhelpful thoughts about John. The other one had all the things that were helpful. Yes, we need to know information. We need to process our information, but what is going to be helpful to my healing forward, me living a sane life, and our reconciliation? And I would really visually actively think about which room am I spending more time in. And especially on nights where we have sex, I think we've talked about this in other episodes, where it may be beneficial for you to even schedule nights where you have sex. So that day you are roping those thoughts down and spending time in that room of, he's done the work. He's built my trust back. He's truly remorseful. I'm seeing all the things that make me attracted to him again. Spend time in that room, and make sure that you're in a good headspace before you even enter in sexually. And that information, I think, was helpful for her, because those flashes and thoughts, they are intrusive. And whether it's about prostitutes or porn or cheating, or a fair partner, you need to stop if it's happening in the moment and bring yourself back. And if you can't get your brain back into the present and stop those thoughts, then you need to stop sex for that night and then try again.
Yeah. And it's interesting too, because our brain, we can even just think about something so much that our brain kind of creates a memory of something, even though it's not legitimately a memory, but our brain is processing it over and over and over and over again to a point where we start to believe whatever that is. We start to believe that that's reality when it's not. And so I think sometimes that's a little bit of the danger of replaying those thoughts over and over again, especially because even if your spouse has given you specific details of what happened, you weren't there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so you're still just creating something that isn't really based in reality. But the more time you spend, like what you were talking about in that room, and reprocessing that over and over and ruminating over it, it really can be damaging to you and to the relationship. And so I love that. The 2 rooms, I love that. And we'll find her book and put it in the show notes.
Because there's been other examples too about the mind of like, you know, between the black dog and the white dog, which one gets bigger? It's whichever one you feed more. And you'll say the neurons that fire together wire together. And our thoughts have so much power. They take up mental real estate. And so we have to be so, you know, you've done all this external work and then you have to do the internal work. And the thought process can be really tricky because it's just between you and yourself and God. You know, like you have to really be diligent about where you're spending your where your time, you know, your time thinking. So the other thing that I know is a struggle for spouses whose husbands who have slept with prostitutes is like replaying over and over, like, how could this person have a transaction, like call somebody, pick somebody up off the street, you know, pay somebody. Sorry if this is triggering for anybody, but these are real things that betrayed spouses feel. And that's not helpful. That was not helpful to me because that's something that they'll unbury in their process if they're really doing the work and find out how they got there. And you've talked about this on other episodes of how things can escalate and they can get to a point where they never thought they would be there.
Yes.
I can understand that because I've had an eating disorder and I worked in a GI clinic. Like I knew the consequences and I don't even know I can't even remember how it started. I just remember one day being like, how did I get here? How did I get to a place where I'm doing something that's harmful to my body? You know? And so that's the nature of addiction. And we do things we never would have done had we not got pulled away in that.
Right. Yeah, so true. So our next question says, do you ever get to a point where your spouse's past with prostitutes doesn't bother you, or will you always experience triggers? And even though this is very similar to our first question, I think that it's interesting the way that we know just with our own stories that the more that we process this, the more that we're able to say things out loud and tell other people parts of our story, the less power those memories have over us. And so as much as it's challenging and, you know, their history, our spouse's history is their history, the impact that it has on us is real. And yet the more that we can disarm that memory, the more that we can disarm the power that it has over us, the better. Because I know that there are still parts of my story that if I talk about it, it'll still make me teary.
Yeah.
And if it does, then I know that I still have some work there. But I can talk about other parts of my story and it doesn't make me teary at all because I've said it over and over and over so many times and I've told it to safe people and because it's become just part of who I am, that it doesn't have that power over me. And so I think that that's one of the best ways that you can almost, if there's a way that you can get past something, I think it comes through that process. The second part is, will you always experience triggers? Yes, triggers are there. And even when we talk about the things that we do to rewire our brain, that we will, you know, get rid of the old things, the old behaviors, and we'll put new behaviors in place. Those old pathways in our brain, they're not gone.
Yeah.
They're there, but they just they're at a lower level and they are not as strong as our new pathways. But again, when something happens and we feel triggered, it's almost as though, you know, some reconstruction was done and those pathways then pop up, and sometimes at the worst time.
Yeah.
And so it just is having that awareness and that realization that these triggers, they're probably never going to go away, but the power that they have over me and the way that they impact me in the moment will be minimal
Yeah.
if I've done the work.
Yeah. And you'll be able to work through them much quicker.
Right.
You know, like I love what you said initially about just sharing out loud. That's why group is so important, because it really, I mean, I feel like that's one of the number one ways we break that shame and that hold that those triggers have. The other thing I was going to suggest is if you've done all these things and you're still battling triggers, doing something like EMDR and some therapy where you can like target those thoughts and the power that it has on your body would be really good. And then I was thinking, oh yeah, so yeah, triggers. I mean, it could be a smell, it could be a sound, it could be color. Like those things are probably going to pop up the rest of your life, but your ability to recognize it, like you said, the power it has over you and work through it quickly changes drastically.
Yeah.
Like now when I get triggered, I think, I can't believe I used to live with this feeling. I didn't know that I was like constantly living in a triggered hyperarousal state. But now that I'm out of it, if I go back into it and I experience a little trigger, I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels so uncomfortable. What do I need to do? Do I need to do some yoga? Do I need to journal? Do I need to call somebody? Do I need to have a conversation with John? And I'm able to work through it very, very quickly, usually within like just a couple hours. It's not feeling the same anymore. And then other times, like I shared on a previous episode about like, I might just be triggered and be like, that's triggering. Like I'm going to have to use all my tools to work through like, okay, that's not what that meant. And, you know, just kind of run through my tools in my head and my statements that remind me of like where I'm at now. And it could just be as simple as that. So it looks different. If you're in a state where you're feeling constantly stressed, overwhelmed, triggered, it does not have to look like that all the time.
Right.
Okay, our last question is, what happens when a partner's porn and sex addiction ends up rearing its ugly head in the bedroom? Well, we kind of talked about this in the first question on this episode. We want to make sure that the work is being done outside of the bedroom. And so that, I mean, if there's still struggles outside of the bedroom, they're going to play out in the bedroom. And so make sure that all the work has been done and pause and figure out what kind of struggles are popping up. Is it images? Is it triggers? Is it flashbacks? Is it feeling unsafe because there's a lack of safety? There's a lack of communication throughout the day. So really try to pinpoint exactly what it is that's making this uncomfortable. Is it different expectations? Does the sex addict want certain things in the bedroom that make the spouse feel uncomfortable? Because that is okay to say, this can't be part of our sex life anymore. And so having conversations around very specifically what is causing you discomfort or fear or anxiety or feeling triggered, and then verbalizing that and making a plan going forward with that. And then again, just to reiterate, don't follow through. Like stop and try to figure out exactly what's going on in that moment. And even if you have to journal to figure out, if I were to ask for one or two things, what would it be? Like, what is it that's causing me to stress right now?
Well, and I know for her specifically, she had given us a little bit more backstory and was feeling like he was bringing his sexual fantasy and what he's seen in pornography into their bedroom and wanting to reenact that with her. And that was making her feel unsafe. And,
Yeah, for
you know,
sure.
it was kind of one of those situations where, and we've heard this from other women, it's like, even when they're in a healthy place, they, and sex is even good. If their husband wants to do something different, then they feel triggered because it's like, oh my gosh, you've never wanted to do this before. Where did you learn about that?
Yeah.
Where did you see that? Did you relapse? Did you, and so, which is legit.
Yeah,
It totally is a legit question and a reason to pause and have that conversation before moving forward so that you do feel safe and so that you know where that's coming from. Yeah.
Yeah, and there may be things that are just off the table forever or 10 years or, that you shouldn't be doing things sexually that make you feel unsafe, used, any of that.
Right.
And for the addict, it's also not very healthy for him to want to play these fantasies out, with their spouse if this is what they've been acting out in. So
Right.
It's okay to say we can't be doing this. Okay, well, thank you for joining us for this conversation. If you liked what you heard, or if you found this episode helpful, please subscribe and share it with people. If you can think about it, we should be talking about it. So please send your questions to us at unfiltered@puredesire.org.